so long as we can do that, we are living proof that a different world is possible. And I think far and wide people will notice these things, and that applies to what we're doing. It applies to what anybody else is doing as well. I think you have to believe that however small the thing you are doing is, it has cosmic significance.
Herzlich willkommen bei einer neuen Episode der Gedankendealer, eurem Format, wo es sich um die Themen Spiritualität, Business, Freundschaft und allgemein das wundervolle Leben dreht. Wir sind total dankbar, dass wir eine UK-Reise machen gerade und sind hier im wunderschönen Yorkshire im Moor und in der schönen Community Camphill. Und ich sitze hier mit einem Gast, dem Marc Barber, auf der Couch im Wohnzimmer in einem der Häuser, und damit ihr so einen Einblick kriegt, wie eigentlich diese Community hier lebt und was die Historie dazu ist, werde ich ihm ganz viele neugierige Fragen stellen, weil ich einfach glaube, dass wir ganz viel davon lernen können, und ich bin gespannt, was ihr davon haltet. Hello, Marc.
Hello.
It sounds so weird. It's like, when I switch, it's like now I'm in the natural mode. So this is the moderation. I'm very happy that you were so spontaneously and agreed to an interview, because it seems like you know so much about the community and the area and the whole history. I was just giving the introduction that we're here in the Camphill community, and for people who've never heard about it, I would like you maybe to tell a little bit about the lifestyle here. But before that, maybe you tell us a little bit about yourself, so we get a feeling, who is Marc Barber, where you come from, and where you're right now in your life.
Okay, so I'll give you a very brief summary. So I'm originally English, and then after university, when I was kind of in my early 20s, I ran across Camphill. So Camphill is this worldwide movement of over 100 communities.
Wow.
All in different ways working with the learning disabled. So I first ran across it in Scotland and then later in America. And I suppose I was probably at a point in my life where I was looking for something very different.
Okay.
And I have to say, from the moment I met Camphill, I was kind of blown away by this completely different world that had been created in these extraordinary communities. And pretty early on, I decided that was what I wanted to do with my life. Now, after a couple of years being in a more established Camphill, I decided that I wanted to do something a little bit more kind of pioneering. So so this is kind of mid-90s at this point. So the Berlin Wall had come down, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and they were just beginning to create a little village in Russia.
Wow.
So this is 96, and this place had been going for maybe a couple of years, and they kind of built a couple of buildings, and so I ended up spending 10 years in Russia trying to pioneer this little community.
Where exactly in Russia?
So it's about 140 kilometers east of St. Petersburg, so not a million miles away from the Finnish border. And then by the time I left, it was actually quite a viable little community with about 40 people and about 20 learning disabled, and then quite a large and vibrant farm garden, and then a series of workshops. Anyway, we came back with my family, and before too long, we then came to Botten. Now, Botten
here in Yorkshire.
Exactly. And Botten in the Camphill world has a very special place, because Botten's it was always like the flagship of the Camphill movement. So it was the oldest of the adult communities. It was the largest of all the communities. It was the one that all across the world they looked to. So we came here in about 2008. And at that point, if I'm honest, Botten Village is quite widely known across the UK. So all kinds of people know about Botten Village. And it's a bit of a... it's a bit of a legend in certain ways. And it's kind of like a little world unto itself. So it's geographically, it's stuck at the back of Danby Dale. So it's this very remote geographical location. And I think because of that, it was able to develop in a very particular way. So for 50, 60 years, It's just this little world that's developed. Sometimes it feels quite divorced from the rest of the world at the back of Danby Dale, and it's a very strange community. For somebody who's never been there, half of the people you meet have some kind of learning disability, and yet it's very, very far from being an institution. It really is a community, and you'll see children running around and all the rest of it.
What is the indicator, or what is the difference from a community and an institution? I mean, I have some ideas about it, but if you could make it concrete and point out the most important characteristics.
Right, okay, so when I say community, so many of us devote our lives, really. This is our vocation. We give our lives to living in this particular way. And this isn't just a job. This is where we live. This is where we raise our families. So it's our working life and also the rest of our life. And often people will spend decades living in these communities. Sometimes up until when they die. So it really is a way of life. And the way we work is those of us who are, we say, vocational volunteers or co-workers, we have a very particular way of organising ourselves. So we have like a horizontal power structure, or at least we try to create a horizontal power structure. So there's no managers, there's no leaders, but we try to work in a collegial way, which has its challenges. I'm not going to pretend it's easy, but that's certainly what we strive to do.
And how do you pick who's the best for the job? Or do you not do it? Is it someone says, okay, I'd like to work at the bakery, and then they can do it? Or how can you match the skill set or the personality to the different jobs that has to get done?
I mean, there's no clear and cut answer to that. Somebody might come and they might have a background in agriculture, and that's what they're fired up to do. And of course, you'd never stand in their way and say, no, you have to do something else.
Go to the office and
absolutely.
Okay.
So some people have a very clear vocation, and that's a wonderful thing. With other people, they come and they're maybe not sure what they have to offer, and maybe we say, well, look, we have a bakery here. The baker's just left, and actually, would you imagine taking that on? So it's always a kind of conversation we try to have with each other. The other thing that makes it a community that I should mention is that we have a particular way of working with money. So each of us gets a salary or wage, as everybody in the world does, but then we pool that into one pot. And then we try to work on a needs-based system.
Hold on, please slow down a little, okay? Because it's very different from where I'm coming from.
Yep.
So you get your salary every month,
exactly,
like everyone else does, and then you put it in a
big pot.
In a big pot.
Metaphorically speaking.
Metaphorically speaking. So is it an account? Like a community account?
It goes into one community account.
One community account. And then does everyone has access to it, or?
Nope. It's a little bit complicated, and also in different communities it takes on different forms.
Okay.
Here we're actually trying to pioneer a very, it's a slightly. So in other communities, for instance, all the money just comes into one pot to begin with, and people don't even get salaries.
Okay.
And then they work on a needs-based system from there. And actually, traditionally in Bottom, that's what we did. More recently, since there were various upheavals here a few years ago, we've all ended up in a situation where we're all technically self-employed. So we all receive a salary into our bank account, and each of us then makes a decision that at the end of the month we then pay our salary over to, the common fund. We'll then make a budget for ourselves for the year, for ourselves and our families. I need X amount, and then on the basis of that budget, you will then take what you perceive to be your needs. Now, the basic idea here is that I have to come and say, look, these are my needs, my family's needs, as I see them. Now, sometimes there's a conversation to be had. Well, it could be
different opinions about it.
Yeah, it could be. Oh, well, actually, we've got quite a tight budget this year, and would you reconsider? Could you? Is there any way you could cut it? But on the other hand, the other side of it is that many people actually don't take enough, and you have to challenge them and say, well, that's actually. Maybe you need a new wardrobe. Maybe you actually do need to take some money. Maybe you should take a holiday.
Okay, so you discuss your expenses and your needs, which are financially supported, with the community, with everyone, or is there
No, it tends not to be with everyone. So we do it in smaller groups, in what we call neighbourhoods, because obviously, you know, the whole circle's about 30 people. That's quite an intimidating place to bring all your personal needs.
I want to have a new dress. Like, exactly. Okay, let's see. We can.
Yeah, I mean, the minutiae you wouldn't necessarily need to bring, but the bigger questions you would. So, you know, if I came with a particularly high budget this year, people might say, well, that's looking a little bit on the high side, and we are struggling a bit. And I might say, well, look, I haven't been to visit my mother over in, you know, Canada for the last 5 years, and whatever.
Wow. Okay.
So those are the kind of conversations you're having, but in smaller groups it tends to be.
Okay. How does that feel? Because
it's not easy.
Yeah, because I would imagine, like, we've just arrived yesterday, but the small community living in that house here, you seem very close to each other. But I also have that question to you: do you choose the people you live with, and what happens? I mean, it's natural that you sometimes feel closer to some people than to others, and I imagine it quite challenging to discuss with people you might not even feel so close to about what's your special needs, or so people who are quite different from your personality. Is that, or is it just my lack of understanding?
Not in the slightest. It is a very challenging thing, because, you know, in this, I mean, where in the world actually is such a scheme run? I can't think of many places.
Yeah.
So it does ask an awful lot of you, and it is very exposing. Now, you know, in the houses, actually, we tend to be with the people that we feel we can live with.
Okay.
But these discussions are happening not on a house level, but on a neighbourhood level. And the whole thing about community is that this is very important. A community is not made up of the people that I would choose as friends. Okay, that's very important. So it's not a community of kind of sympathetic souls. All kinds of people end up in community, and the challenge actually is to weave a community web with all kinds of people who you wouldn't necessarily choose to, you know, go out for a meal with or socialise with.
So diversity is key.
Diversity is key, and that's and that can be very challenging.
Yes, but great.
Great when it works. Yeah, great when it works.
Okay.
But those are very, very exposing conversations, or they
Yes.
can be on occasions. But it's also quite interesting because on the other side, you'd think, okay, if you set up a system like this, you know, we're all taught in this day and age to think that every individual is a kind of like a selfish actor.
Yeah.
We're trying to, you know, this is the basic premise on which all our economic system is based on, is that each of us is trying to maximise, you know, the goods, what comes to us. Now, obviously, what we're trying to do has to be based on a different premise. And what is very interesting is that while you will always have outliers, so, you know, individual X will spend, you know, significantly more than other people. That's always balanced with, you know, another individual who's actually spending, you know, far less. And what we tend to find actually is that as an aggregate, the needs of each person are fairly reasonable. And in a strange kind of way, although you get these kind of anomalies with individuals, overall, it has a magic way of working itself out within the budget, which kind of belies the myth that somehow we're all kind of selfish actors. You know, everything we're trying to do in community is based on a completely different presumption, that actually, you know, the human being is is an altruistic being. If everything else is stripped away, if they don't feel, you know, economically vulnerable, but if you can actually give them a certain kind of security in life, you will find that the inner altruism will begin to manifest. And I think, you know, in so many ways that's often what we see in community.
It's very interesting and very contrary to the Maslow need pyramid, and that because it's like once you have your essential needs covered, you always step one level higher, and the highest would be the self-actualization. But what you actually say is if you have everything covered, the inner altruism is tend to come out more likely. Is that what you're saying?
I think I am saying that, but I'm not sure. I mean, not being an expert on Maslow, but I'm not sure it contradicts that because, you know, a self-actualized person. What is a self-actualized person?
Yeah.
it's a spiritually awake person.
Okay.
And I think if you are really, well, first of all, if your immediate economic needs are covered, your immediate general needs are covered, you can begin to spiritually awaken, if you want to put it in those terms, self-actualize. And I think that does take you to a place where you begin to realize that we're not just discrete little entities, but we're part of a web. And actually, as a human being, it's only when you are part of this wider human web that you are actually fully realized in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think,
so maybe it even implicates it. The self-actualization.
I think so.
Is the broader thinking of yourself as being a part of a system, and also becoming creative about the ideas, what you can contribute to the whole system. That's very inspiring. We've talked a little bit before the interview, and I asked you to really point that out because I find that very interesting. When you let's take it personal. When I looked at the website and it says a community where people living with different ages and abilities, you could get the impression very quick that it's about providing something for people with learning disabilities. But you told me before the interview, you have a different reason why you live in that community. Maybe you could repeat that. That would be very nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky balance because on the one side we are also, or we're part of, a care provider.
Yes.
So that's part of our job. We have to do that. We have to provide care. But I think as somebody who's dedicated most of my adult life to living in these communities, what really inspires me is something a bit more than that. It's not just providing high quality care. That's a part of what we do. But really what inspires me is living in community. And what we always say in the Camphill communities is that we're not creating communities for the learning disabled, which is what tends to be what the outside world sees. Yeah. We are creating communities with the learning disabled. And I think from where I'm standing, that makes all the difference in the world. So really, and I was explaining this to you earlier, we know that over the last couple of hundred years since the Industrial Revolution, everything in the world has tended to tear people apart. So traditional social structures have broken down. We know that, we see that everywhere. And we've kind of reached a crisis point, which I think we're all aware of, which is where wherever you look, you see there's drug abuse, there's epidemic loneliness, there's mental health crisis. There's political, particularly in this country, there's political breakdown. There's also climate breakdown, and in many ways, all of that is just a projection of the crisis that's going on inside each of us.
So, like a symptom.
I think so. Yeah, I think we project onto the world, onto the external world, the crisis that's actually happening inside us. And I think deep down, if we can actually find the peace and look inside. What we'll find is that there's a lack of peace in ourselves very often, a lack of meaning, and also a lack of connection. So a lack of connection to the earth, spiritual connection, and also to each other. And I think really at its best, Camphill is an attempt to address those symptoms. And it's about kind of rebuilding connections. So we connect with the land.
How do you do that? If you
well, we work not just organically, but it's called biodynamically. So we try to really come to a spiritual understanding of our connection with the earth and its various rhythms. We try to connect with each other. We try to build this community. And what I was saying to you earlier is that the reason why it's so significant that the learning disabled are part of this is that I've become completely convinced over the years I've worked in these communities that if you try to build the community that we're all yearning for, really, deep down, amongst educated, intelligent, so-called normal people today, chances are that will break down. Because fundamentally we're all a little bit too selfish, a little bit too self-absorbed. And I think the reason why the Camphill communities have been amongst the most successful communities in the Western world since the war is because the essential ingredient there is the learning disabled. And the learning disabled may not have the faculties that they would need to get on in the modern world, to master social media and write a job application, all the rest of it. But they have qualities that the rest of us have lost touch with.
What kind of qualities?
So I often talk about with the fairy tales. There'll be three brothers, and there's the two ambitious brothers who go off and they seeking to slay their dragon or find their princess, and they'll go off into the world and they'll be in such a rush that it always ends badly. And then there's always the third brother, and the third brother in the Russian fairy tales is Nitaki, Nisyaki, Savsiem Durak, or something like that, which means he's kind of not like this and not like that. He's quite an idiot, actually.
Okay.
So to all the world, the third son is a bit of a fool, and yet he goes into the world with an open heart, and he leaves his home, and unlike his two brothers, there's an old beggar sat by the side of the road, and instead of rushing past her, he sits down next to her, and he breaks his bread with her, and from that moment, a world of synchronicity opens up to him. Things fall into his lap in a way that the intellectual ones actually don't manage. And I think our learning disabled friends often have that quality. It's this kind of openness of heart that allows us to build community. If it was left to you and I, we wouldn't manage. So there's this wonderful kind of glue that holds us together, and that's the presence of these wonderful people.
It sounds so beautiful, like a spark, like a magical spark that is into it. And you seem to be very touched once you talk about it, and because you probably talk about persons you share your life with, and they have different gifts. They probably contribute to that. It's interesting. What was your I want to make it very simple, like your maybe an example you can tell me about you had when you came to that understanding, because it seems like you reflected on that based on experiences you made. Is there an example you can tell us maybe where you realized, oh wow, now that's why?
Yeah, I don't think I can give you one example. I think it's almost like a daily thing. So when you live with these people, and 25 years I've been living with these people, and I still have this experience where I'll come down, I've got all my ideas, all my plans for the day in my head, and then one of these folk will come along and they'll come with their own little thing, and there's always that moment when you kind of have to okay, you overcome yourself. Okay, now I'm going to listen to this. I'm going to give them a bit of time, and you kind of have to overcome yourself, because you're so convinced, like the older brothers in the fairy tale. You're so convinced that this is what I need to do right now, and of course they come with whatever left field thing they come with. And even now I find myself having to overcome myself.
Wow.
Okay, so now I need to take the time, and now I need to just listen to what's being said.
Wow.
And often it takes you to a place that
it's something new, something totally different.
Exactly. It kind of transcends this kind of mindset that we have.
Beautiful.
Yeah, but I'm not there. As I say, it's a daily lesson for me. It's a daily lesson.
Yeah. But I remember yesterday at supper you also said it's like this, almost like a bubble, because it's so beautiful, and there has been quite some changes. Maybe you can take me into the history of Bunten and the big change, and what is your approach of doing things differently now?
Okay, so Bunten was a very, very special place. So it was a community built up over 60 years in, as I say, this very remote kind of geographical locality.
Sorry for interrupting. Who was the one or the two or the people
who founded it?
Who came up with the idea?
So it began, the whole idea, Camphill, began as an idea with a gentleman called Karl Koenig, who was an Austrian pediatrician, and he fled the Nazis along with a group of younger people. So these are very educated Austrian Jews in the main. And they washed up on the shores of the UK, and this is talking 1939, 1940. So you can imagine this bunch of German-speaking emigres suddenly turning up in Scotland at the beginning of the war, with their very German accents, and many of them not even speaking English. And they try to create this home up near Aberdeen, actually, for learning disabled children to begin with.
Okay.
And it was in Camphill House that it began. So that's where the name came from. And from that point, particularly after the end of the war, it kind of mushroomed. And before very long, there were hundreds of children involved in the school up in Aberdeen. And then at a certain point, the parents of these children, as they graduated, would come to Carl Koenig and say, well, look, you've done a wonderful job with our children for these years, but what happens now? Because, we're talking kind of 1950s, early 1950s. There was very little provision, if any, for learning disabled adults. And so he then conceived this idea of the adult communities, of which Botten and then another one up in Aberdeen called Newton D were the first.
Okay.
And his idea was to create, real functioning communities, but also it was more than that. He was trying to create, in a way, a better world in microcosm. That's really what he was trying to do. And his vision from the beginning was this vast vision of social renewal and spiritual renewal as well. So he wasn't just thinking about high quality provision for the learning disabled. I mean, he was thinking about that, and he did it very well. But his vision was so much bigger than that.
What a person, huh?
Yeah,
wow.
Extraordinary man. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for giving me the the background or the foundation. And then if you say Botten, you already told me that this is like the outstanding, where the whole Camphill International community looks towards, but there has been some changes. So so a few years back. What is a few years like?
So this is kind of starting probably 2010, 2011, that kind of time. I'll be very careful what I say. So put as objectively as I can put it, I think what happened was the charity that both owned and ran Botten Village was taken over by a group of people who did not have much background in Camphill. So they came in with a fairly conventional idea of what social care is. And I think that they regarded what we were doing as a little bit too quirky for their needs for the modern world. So in fairly quick measure, they went about trying to turn it into a relatively conventional social care provider. Okay, that's about as objectively as I can put it. Now there was a whole, obviously we didn't take that lying down. Many of us, and actually some far more than me, had given literally decades of their lives to this work. So we weren't about to just roll over and agree to that.
Sure.
So we launched a very big campaign with the support of an awful lot of very loyal kind of supporters of ours. And it was a kind of media campaign, and eventually we fundraised a significant amount of money and managed to get them to the High Court. And the long and the short of it was we eventually ended up in a kind of High Court mediated process.
Oh, wow.
And the upshot of that was, while those people continued to control the charity, and while the charity continued to retain all the assets in Botten Village, we were allowed to rent 12 properties in Botten Village to begin to create our new community, which we called...
Your own.
Yeah, so we came up with a new name then, and we called ourselves the ESK Valley Camphill Community.
I see.
So in a way, we kind of relaunched our community at that point. Based initially on those 12 properties. So we lost, all the wonderful 600 acres of land that had been farmed biodynamically for 60 years.
By the people.
Yeah,
of Camphill.
Absolutely. That was lost. All these wonderful workshops we built up over many years were lost, but we had kind of like a toehold in these 12 properties. From there, over the last few years, we've bought a health shop in the local village. Which allows us to kind of interact with the local community. We set up a bakery in partnership with somebody else in Whitby, which is about 10 miles away from here. And then, most significantly, we've just purchased this property here. So right now we're located about 3 miles down outside of Botten Village. So this is the first real property that we as a community, the ESK Valley Camphill Community, own. And I think what's significant is that all these initiatives are happening now outside of Botten. And so I think we're fairly consciously making a decision that this wonderful little utopia we created in Botten needs somehow to open its doors and to begin to interact much more comprehensively with the world. And I think that's a healthy thing from both sides. I think it's a healthy thing for us if there's more interaction with the outside world.
Because of what? What do you think is
because
so good about it?
Because I think, okay, if I take a really big perspective,
yes, please.
My personal feeling is that humanity faces a huge moment right now. We know that in the coming decades we're facing existential questions. And I kind of think you've got to be there. You've got to be in the marketplace, and you've got to be saying your bit. And you've got to be saying, this is what's important. This is the community experiment we've
and it worked.
Piloted for 60, 70 years, and we believe it has relevance to the world. We believe in a world where there's so many crises on so many levels that kind of consciously rebuilding our connections to each other, our connections to the spiritual world, and our connections to the earth in the way that we've tried to do in the Camphill communities. We honestly believe this has something to offer, the wider world. And in particular, to begin to value again what these marginalised people, the learning disabled, actually have to offer. Back in Russia, but not only Russia actually, I think also in Western Europe, the learning disabled were called the Holy Fools.
The Holy Fools.
They were the Holy Fools, and there was this understanding. Often they have a special place in the Russian churches, the learning disabled, because it's recognised that these people have a kind of they have access to a kind of intelligence that the rest of us need, and I've long felt that in the Camphill communities, with their help, we've managed to kind of weave this culture of the heart. Which I think is so relevant to the world today, where you can see that the intellect is killing everything. And to learn to kind of weave a culture of the heart again, I think is our way out of crisis.
So if we stay in that broader picture, I want to take it to a next level. Because to me, it feels like something is boiling, different sides, and then it will come to a big explosion. And then I'm curious how these different sides, I would even say it, will develop into something together, or if it will make even two parts of life. Does it make any sense?
It makes complete sense to me.
Mind working.
It feels like there's a kind of parting of the ways taking place, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So as you say, that in terms of the technology, it's leaping ahead beyond our comprehension. And I suppose that there's a huge body of people who will go with that. And I think that's based on this fundamental conception that the human being is really an advanced biological computer.
Yes.
And it's an advanced biological computer that will soon be superseded by higher intelligences. So that's the very materialistic viewpoint.
Yeah.
And I think that will hold great appeal to a great many people. But then, obviously in Camphill, but I think in many other streams now, I think you've got another group of people who are waking up and saying, "No, hang on, that's not what we are.
Yeah.
That's not what a human is. A human is not simply an intellect on legs.
Yes.
The human consciousness is so much more profound than that, and it is. Yes, it's an intellect, but it's also the realm of the heart, and it's also our body and our connection to the wider world and to the spiritual world as well. So it does. I can absolutely see what you're saying there. That there does seem to be this immense parting of the ways here.
Yes.
And I think those of us, because the world of science is backed by big money and the corporations and the media and everything else. And I think those of us who profoundly disagree with that direction of travel I think we have to very quickly organise ourselves and refine our thinking.
Yes.
If we're not going to just be kind of if we're not going to be just trampled by this juggernaut.
Exactly. So if we more practical, like you say, family are raising their children in the community. They go into a Steiner school close by. How do you use, for example, any digital tools? Is that something you say no, we don't want that in the community, or are you finding new ways of I don't know, going with the digital transformation or?
Yeah, okay, so I think the short answer to that is while there's always been an uneasiness about digital things in the community, many of us use the digital world probably more than we should, just like everybody else in the world. So it's not as if we have a kind of Amish approach to these things. So I think it'll be as much a challenge for us as anybody else. As the technology advances, to begin to wake up and ask ourselves, where are we in this? So I don't think we have any particular answers there that the rest of the world doesn't have. But you can well imagine that 10, 20 years from now, many people will be waking up and thinking, actually maybe I don't need the latest gadget.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to be getting my hands dirty in the soil right now.
Yeah, or get connection with my family.
Exactly.
Or my inner self.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's very beautiful. And because you were saying there's some people who live there decades, and you've been living in communities for 25 years. So for you it's not temporary, but some of the people are just coming here for a year or 2 years. What is do you have any plans for yourself, for your life? Will you continue building up this community here, or will you plan on going somewhere else?
I think for now I'm pretty, because it feels like a community reborn here, if I'm honest. And I think we're still in the process of kind of refining what it is we're trying to do. And I think, obviously the vision that Carl Koenig had 70, 80 years ago was extraordinary. But the world has changed beyond recognition in the last 80 years. Yeah. And I think now is an opportunity to take this concept that Koenig had, but to try to adapt it to these extraordinary challenges we're facing today. And I think it's very much about a real dialogue with the world. Where is the world right now, and what do we have to offer, and what do we have to learn as well? So I think right now I personally feel very, very much as though this is where I need to be. But it's not just about kind of rolling out, this is who we are. It's to me, it's this conversation. It's this real questioning. What does the world need right now? What is the way forward?
And what can I contribute to?
And what can I contribute? Yeah, and I think in different ways, so many people all over the world are facing a similar question. Because it's very easy to be crushed by the immensity of what we face. It's very easy. And I think, to begin to value again in these micro deeds that we do. And it's so. So our work is based on anthroposophy. It's Rudolf Steiner, and he talked about a new way of medicine, a new way of healing, which was to do with homeopathy. Now, the principle of homeopathy is that you take some tiny piece of material, and you dilute it until it's no longer there.
But you have the information.
Exactly, but it's something infinitesimally small that has this kind of cosmic significance. And I think you absolutely have to believe that in this day and age, that however tiny the thing that you are doing is, it has profound implications and importance for the challenges that all of humanity is facing. And I've always said about what we're doing here, that so long as we can keep doing it, however small and however challenging what we do might be, so long as we can keep doing it and keep trying to build, as I say, this kind of culture of the heart that stands against this kind of intellectual culture that's invading us all the time, so long as we can do that, we are living proof that a different world is possible. And I think, far and wide, people will notice these things. And that applies to what we're doing. It applies to what anybody else is doing as well. I think you have to believe that however small the thing you are doing is, it has cosmic significance.
In a negative and in a positive way.
Exactly.
That's right,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a big treat that you are so welcoming here in this house, and that you shared so much with me. Thank you so much, Marc.
Thank you very much indeed.
I always was making this joke to Sarah because we are planning on having 1 million followers. Is there anything you want to address or anything you want to draw awareness to, like a project? Probably we're going to put in the show notes the link for the community for any donations, or is there anything in specific or anything else you want to draw attention to?
Well, I think it would all be on that link there. Obviously what we're trying to do here with this particular project, we're still paying for this, and obviously the quicker we can pay this off, the quicker we can then begin to develop this project out in the community, kind of building links. So any support that would be possible, absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay, I'll make sure to spread the word, take home some of that magic and a lot of inspiration. And I feel my heart much more than before. It's interesting, not so intellectual. Thank you very much, Marc.
Thank you ever so much.
Danke, dass ihr dabei wart, dass ihr zugehört habt, zugeschaut habt. Wie immer, wenn ihr Fragen habt, bitte einfach reinschreiben. Ich werde sie auch an Marc und die Community weiterleiten. Und lasst mich wissen, was ihr denkt, was ihr davon haltet und was ihr vielleicht direkt für euch mitnehmen könnt. Ich nehme eine ganze Menge von dem Gespräch heute mit. Also, liebe Grüße aus Yorkshire, aus Camphill. Bye bye.